There are mornings when the alarm rings, and you do not feel anger, not even resistance, only a quiet heaviness. You sit at the edge of the bed for a few seconds longer than you should. The room is still. The air is cool, and yet inside, something feels tired before the day has even begun. You wash your face. You look at yourself in the mirror. Nothing dramatic, nothing broken, just a pair of eyes that have carried too much in silence. Responsibilities, expectations, words you swallowed yesterday, the effort of staying composed when you wanted to fall apart. And now, another day stands in front of you, asking to be lived. Have you ever stepped into a day already wounded by the one before it? Have you ever smiled at people while a quiet storm moved beneath your chest? Have you ever continued, not because you felt strong, but because stopping would create more questions than you could answer? There is a particular kind of exhaustion that does not come from the body. It comes from drifting, from waking without direction, from reacting to everything and choosing nothing. The day pulls you, messages, noise, demands, and by evening, you wonder where your intention went. You were busy, but were you present? You endured, but did you act with purpose? I know this feeling well. The slow erosion of meaning, the sense that life is happening around you, not through you. The quiet fear that you are capable of more, yet unsure how to begin again, not with grand gestures, not with loud declarations, but with something steadier, something quieter. What if the day did not have to conquer you? What if stepping into each morning was less about surviving and more about choosing? Choosing how you stand, choosing how you respond, choosing what deserves your energy and what does not. Not perfectly, not heroically, just deliberately. There is a way of moving through the world that does not depend on applause or control. A way of carrying your pain without letting it dictate your direction. A way of meeting each task, each conversation, each difficulty as a conscious act rather than a reflex. It begins before the first word you speak, before the first decision you make. It begins in that quiet moment at the edge of the bed. In the next part, let us look gently at what it means to step into a day not as a victim of circumstance, but as a participant in your own becoming. When we step into the world and begin to brush against other people, what exhausts us is rarely the work itself. More often, it is the words, the tone, the subtle dismissal, a comment spoken lightly that lingers heavily. We ask ourselves why they had to say it that way, why someone close could be so sharp, why a friend could turn distant, why society seems so quick to judge. If we slow down and look more carefully, a quiet truth begins to appear. People act from the level of awareness they currently possess. No one gives what they do not have. A person who is raised in constant criticism may only know how to motivate through criticism. Someone who lives in fear may try to control. Someone who has never been truly heard may not know how to listen to your pain. This does not excuse the harm. It simply explains its source. Their behavior reflects the landscape inside them, not the worth inside you. When a parent says, "You are not good enough," there is often anxiety beneath the sentence. When a friend mocks your ambition, there may be insecurity behind the laughter. When a colleague undermines you in public, there may be a quiet fear of being overshadowed. Every reaction carries a history. Every harsh word carries an inner wound that existed long before you arrived. The Stoic perspective does not ask you to deny the sting. It asks you to separate what belongs to you from what does not. Their opinions, their fears, their projections, these are theirs to manage. Your character, your choices, your response, these remain within your domain. The moment you confuse the two, you begin to carry burdens that were never meant for you. When someone hurts us, our first instinct is often self-doubt. We turn inward and search for flaws. We wonder what we did wrong, but if we step back with calm attention, we may see that their words are more like a mirror reflecting their inner distortions. If the mirror is cracked, the reflection will appear fractured, not because you are broken, but because the surface reflecting you is unstable. This does not mean you must tolerate disrespect. It does not mean you remain in harmful environments. Stoicism is not silent submission. It is the discipline of protecting the integrity of your inner life. You may set boundaries. You may walk away, but you do not have to shrink in order to do so. In families, labels often form early. Too sensitive. Too stubborn. Not successful enough. These identities are repeated until they feel permanent. Yet they are often simplifications born from misunderstanding. In society, the same pattern continues. People assess quickly. They react before they reflect. They interpret through the lens of their own unresolved narratives. Understanding this softens something inside us, not into weakness, but into clarity. We begin to see that many wounds inflicted by others were never personal in the way we imagined. We happen to stand in the path of someone else's unexamined pain. And yet, even with this understanding, something still aches. We can intellectually recognize that their behavior speaks of them, not us. We can remind ourselves that our value is not diminished by someone else's ignorance. We can analyze the situation with composure and still feel the quiet sting when we remember it. So why do we still hurt? There is a particular kind of pain that does not come only from what was said, but from what we hoped would be said instead. When someone disappoints us, the wound is rarely created in that single moment. It has been forming quietly, long before the words were spoken. It grows in the space where expectation lives, in the silent belief that this person should understand, should appreciate, should respond differently. We do not suffer only because they hurt us. We suffer because we expected something else. Expectation is subtle. It does not always announce itself. Sometimes it hides inside love, inside loyalty, inside the effort we have given without counting. We tell ourselves we are simply caring. But beneath that care is a quiet contract. I show up for you. You will show up for me. I respect you. You will respect me. I see your worth. You will see mine. When that invisible contract is broken, something collapses inside. Not just trust, identity. There is also attachment, not only to people, but to images. The image of being valued, the image of being understood, the image of being treated fairly. We cling to these images as if they were guarantees. When reality does not match them, we feel betrayed by life itself. And then there is the longing to be recognized, to be acknowledged, to be seen clearly, to have our effort affirmed. This desire is deeply human. It begins in childhood and rarely leaves us. We want our pain to be validated, our work to be noticed, our loyalty to be appreciated. When recognition does not come, we question our significance. The mind starts to replay the moment over and over. It searches for meaning. It builds arguments. It defends itself in imaginary conversations that will never happen, and each replay tightens the knot. This is where suffering deepens, not in the original event, but in the attachment to how it should have been. Not in the words themselves, but in the resistance to their existence. Stoic thought does not ask you to suppress the ache. It does not demand that you pretend not to care. It understands that emotions arise naturally. They move through us before we can stop them. The first reaction is not a moral failure. It is human. But there is a quiet space after the first wave. A pause. In that pause, something important becomes visible. The emotion is present, but it does not have to become the ruler. It does not have to dictate your identity. It does not have to shape your next action. Pain says, "You are diminished." Expectation says, "This was not how it was supposed to go." Attachment says, "I needed this to be different." The desire for recognition says, "See me, confirm me, prove that I matter." These voices are understandable. They are not enemies. Yet when they blend together without awareness, they create a story that feels absolute. A story where another person's action defines your value, where a single moment becomes a verdict on who you are. That is where suffering tightens its grip. If we look carefully, the deepest pain often comes from handing our sense of worth to something unstable, to another person's mood, to their level of maturity, to their ability to perceive us accurately. We anchor our identity in shifting ground. When it moves, we fall with it. The Stoic stance is quieter than many imagine. It does not say, "Do not feel." It says, "Feel," and then observe. Let the emotion rise. Let it be acknowledged, but do not let it become your compass. Because emotions are powerful, but they are temporary. They surge. They color the moment. They convince us that what we feel now is the full truth, yet often they are only a fragment. There is dignity in allowing yourself to feel hurt. There is also strength in not building your entire self around that hurt. And perhaps tonight, in the stillness, the more important question is not why they acted as they did, but what inside you tightened so quickly when it happened. Let that question remain here with you, quietly, before we begin to explore what can be practiced. When we speak about practice, it does not begin in grand moments. It begins in very ordinary ones. A conversation at the dinner table, a message that feels colder than expected, a meeting where your effort is overlooked. These are the places where composure is not an idea, but a choice. One quiet principle is this: pause before you interpret, not to suppress your reaction, but to delay the story your mind wants to create. Imagine you receive a brief reply from someone you care about. Only a few words, no warmth. The mind quickly fills the silence with meaning. They are upset. They do not value me. I did something wrong. In that small space, irritation grows. Yet if you allow a pause, you may see that you are responding not to facts, but to interpretation. The Stoic discipline here is simple. Separate what happened from what you assumed. A short message is a fact. The rest is narrative. When you loosen your grip on the narrative, your calm remains more intact. Another principle is remembering what is truly within reach. In a workplace disagreement, you may present an idea with clarity and care, and still watch it be dismissed. The instinct is to convince harder, to control the room, to force acknowledgement, but influence has limits. You cannot command another person's perception. What remains yours is the manner in which you present yourself, your steadiness, your tone, your integrity. When you anchor your effort there, disappointment does not consume you in the same way. You may leave the room unheard, yet not diminished. There is also the practice of examining the first impulse. A friend forgets an important date. You feel overlooked. The impulse may be to withdraw or respond with quiet distance. Instead of acting immediately, you observe the emotion as it forms. It says, "I was not valued." That feeling is real, but before turning it into action, you ask whether this single event defines the entire relationship. Often it does not. By observing rather than obeying the first impulse, you protect something inside yourself. You respond from clarity rather than reaction. A further principle is perspective, not in a dramatic sense, but in a grounded one. Imagine standing in traffic after a long day, replaying a hurtful comment. The body tightens, the jaw hardens. In that moment, you might ask, how large is this event in the wider shape of my life? Will this sentence matter in a year? Often, the answer softens the grip of the moment. This does not erase the hurt. It places it in proportion. Perspective restores balance without denying reality. There is also the quiet habit of returning attention to conduct. If someone speaks sharply to you in public, your control does not lie in reshaping their character on the spot. It lies in how you stand, how you answer, how you carry yourself afterward. When your behavior remains measured, you step out of the cycle of escalation. You demonstrate that your inner state is not easily commandeered. Over time, this becomes a source of quiet confidence, not because others change, but because you are less shaken. These principles are not shields that block all discomfort. They are anchors. They remind you that your inner life is not public property. You cannot prevent every misunderstanding. You cannot ensure constant fairness. But you can decide where your attention settles. You can decide which thoughts you nurture. You can decide the quality of your response. In daily life, this looks modest. A breath taken before replying. A sentence spoken without edge. A choice not to replay the same wound again before sleep. Small movements, repeated quietly. When practiced consistently, something subtle changes. You begin to notice that while the world continues in its unpredictability, your interior feels more stable, not rigid, not indifferent, simply steady. And in that steadiness, there is space to rest. There comes a stage in life when the need to win begins to feel heavy, not because you are incapable, not because you lack strength, but because you start to see what winning often costs. To win an argument, you must prove someone else wrong. To win a rivalry, you must measure yourself against another. To win in pride, you must defend an image without pause. And each of these victories, if examined closely, carries tension inside it. The Stoic spirit does not aim at triumph over people. It aims at clarity within oneself. That is a very different direction. One seeks dominance. The other seeks alignment. When you try to defeat someone in a disagreement, your mind narrows. You listen only to respond. You gather evidence not for understanding, but for attack. Even if you succeed, if the room falls silent and your logic stands unchallenged, notice what remains in your body. Often there is tightness, a residue, a subtle agitation that lingers long after the conversation ends. Now consider another outcome. You speak firmly. You express your view, and when it becomes clear that the other person is not ready to see it, you let the argument rest, not out of weakness, not out of fear, but because your inner balance matters more than the final word. Outwardly, this may look like losing. Inwardly, it is not. Winning over others depends on circumstances, on timing, on their willingness to concede. It is unstable. Today you are correct. Tomorrow you may not be. Peace of mind, however, does not require applause. It does not depend on recognition. It grows from coherence between your values and your actions. There is a quiet dignity in not needing to prove yourself constantly. In earlier years, many of us mistake intensity for strength. We push, we argue, we insist. We believe that if we do not defend our ground at every moment, we will be erased. But over time, experience reveals something softer and more solid at once. You are not diminished because someone disagrees. You are not smaller because someone refuses to acknowledge your worth. The urge to win is often rooted in fear. Fear of being unseen. Fear of being invalidated. Fear of losing status. When that fear loosens, the battle loses its urgency. Stoicism does not reject excellence. It does not encourage passivity. It simply refuses to tie identity to comparison. You can strive. You can improve. You can stand firm. But you do not need another person's defeat to confirm your existence. There is a profound difference between overcoming someone and overcoming your own turbulence. When you overcome another, the victory is visible. It can be displayed. When you overcome your impulse to retaliate, no one may notice. Yet the second transforms you more deeply. Imagine walking away from a confrontation where you could have delivered a cutting response. You chose not to. Not because you lacked words, but because you recognize the cost of using them. The mind remains clearer, the body lighter. There is space inside. That space is freedom. Freedom is not the ability to control outcomes. It is the ability to remain intact regardless of them. When you no longer require constant validation, you move differently. You listen more calmly. You speak with less urgency. You let others keep their opinions without feeling compelled to reshape them. The world continues to argue, to compare, to compete, but something inside you stands apart from the noise. You begin to see that true strength is quiet. It does not rush forward to conquer. It remains steady enough that conquest becomes unnecessary. And in that steadiness, you discover a different kind of success. Not the success of standing above others, but the success of standing within yourself. There is relief in this realization, a loosening of the jaw, a slower breath, the understanding that you do not have to win every exchange to live well. You walk your path. Others walk theirs. Sometimes they intersect. Sometimes they diverge. You no longer chase every crossing as if it were a battlefield. Instead, you continue forward like someone leaving a crowded arena at dusk, stepping onto a quiet road where the noise fades behind them. And ahead, there is only a long stretch of earth touched gently by the last light. In the end, nothing dramatic changes. The world remains unpredictable. People remain imperfect. Voices still rise. Opinions still clash. What changes is quieter than that. It is the way you sit with yourself after a long day. The way you breathe when memory tries to reopen an old wound. The way your shoulders no longer tense at every disagreement. Stoicism is not a shield made of stone. It is more like a slow settling of dust. You begin to notice that not every word deserves entry into your inner room. Not every judgment deserves residence. Not every conflict requires your participation. There was a time when every sharp tone felt like a verdict. Every silence felt like rejection. Every misunderstanding felt like proof that something in you was lacking. Now the same events pass differently. You hear the tone. You register the silence. You see the misunderstanding. And yet, something inside remains seated, not rigid, not cold, simply unmoved. You still feel. The sting still appears. The disappointment still arrives. The heart still tightens for a moment, but it no longer builds a house around the pain. It allows it to pass through. There is a gentleness in this, a kind of maturity that does not announce itself. You do not need to win every conversation. You do not need to correct every false perception. You do not need to prove your depth to those who cannot see it. You begin to trust something quieter than validation, your conduct, your intention, your alignment with what you believe is right. When others act from confusion, you see the confusion. When others project their unrest, you recognize the unrest. You no longer confuse their storm with your sky, and because of that, the sky within you widens. There is more space now. Space between stimulus and response. Space between emotion and action. Space between who you are and what someone says about you. In that space, dignity grows. It is not loud dignity. It does not demand applause. It simply stands. You start to realize that peace is not found by rearranging the world. It is found by refusing to let the world rearrange you, not through force, not through denial, but through steady awareness. A life lived this way looks ordinary from the outside. You go to work. You speak with family. You walk through crowded streets. Nothing announces that you are practicing anything at all. Yet inwardly, there is less friction, less urgency to defend, less hunger to be seen, less fear of being misunderstood. There is also more responsibility, because when you accept that your inner state is yours to guard, excuses begin to fade. You cannot blame another person for your bitterness forever. You cannot assign your unrest entirely to circumstance. You see clearly what belongs to you, and you carry it with care. Over time, this way of living becomes natural. You wake, you act, you encounter difficulty, you respond. You do not dramatize your resilience. You do not romanticize your wounds. You simply continue. There is a quiet strength in that continuation, not the strength of resistance, the strength of steadiness. At night, when the noise fades and the room grows dim, you no longer replay every conversation with urgency. You allow the day to settle. Some things remain unresolved. Some people remain unchanged. And yet, you are not at war with it. You understand now that serenity is not a reward granted by others. It is a discipline practiced in solitude. No one sees the moments you chose silence over retaliation. No one counts the times you paused instead of reacting. But you know, and that knowledge is enough. The Stoic path does not promise admiration. It offers clarity. It does not remove hardship. It reshapes your relationship to it. In the quiet of your own awareness, you discover that freedom was never in controlling the world. It was in no longer needing to. And sometimes that is all.